Ladies and gentlemen, let us now continue to the second keynote lecture entitled The T in the SEADR.
Our second keynote speaker is Dr. Maarten Dolk from Utrecht University, the Netherlands, whose presentation will be chaired by Bapak Markus Budi Raharjo, EDD. Please give a warm welcome to both of them.
Good morning. I hope this chill morning, here we call it chill, it's our winter here. We are here to be happy together, to learn together, and we welcome Dr. Maarten Dolk. Hopefully I'm right. We are going to have this up to 8:45. And I think most of us know him because Dr. Maarten Dolk has been here in Indonesia since 2006. He has helped a lot in terms of developing teaching English, teaching mathematics. Sorry, because I'm from English education. Teaching mathematics from a realistic perspective. And I know very little about it because I was born years before and I was taught in mathematics in more formalistic way. So I think this is a very good moment for us to learn more about realistic mathematics from the expert. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Maarten Dolk to present for about 40 minutes, and then the rest will be for question and answer session. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's indeed very chill here. It is one of the few times that it is warmer in the Netherlands than it is here. Yesterday it was 40.5 degrees in some places in the Netherlands, what is incredibly warm. The earlier record was 38 degrees, and that was set 75 years ago. So, yeah, 40 degrees in Europe is unbelievable. It's also unbearable. So I'm very happy to be here and to avoid that. SEADR is described in different ways, because some people talk about the Southeast Asian Design Research Conference. Some people talk about it as the Development Research Conference. It's always a bit unclear what it is. It has multiple meanings. The D can mean development, it can mean design. When I am in classes in different countries, my first question is always, who is doing the mathematics? Because if you go to different countries, and you look at schools, often you see the same things happening. A teacher in front of the classroom, children working on different problems, but in reality, the mathematics that is done in the classroom is the mathematics that is decided by the textbook authors. It's not the mathematics of the children, it is not the mathematics of the teacher. In most cases it's mathematics from the book. In some cases it's mathematics of the teacher. But I'm interested in young children doing mathematics. So I'm interested in creating classrooms where the problem that we give them, the investigation, the design, will allow children to do mathematics themselves. So how can we create classes where that happens? Now, that means that we have to change. We are not going for a class where memorization is important. When I was in school, memorization was the way most kids did it. Of course, you memorized the wrong rules, or you used the wrong rules on the wrong times, and mathematics was very scary. It is not a class where we talk about procedures with or without connections. It's not a class where we are only doing mathematics. but I am really looking at classes where children actively reinvent mathematics. That means that as a teacher, my role is constantly changing. Well, the question is, of course, can children even reinvent mathematics? And many people say that's nonsense, but the reality is we know from reality and we know from research that people can reinvent mathematics. A good many years ago, researchers looked for university PhD students who just had enough knowledge to develop very well-known theories in mathematics, and they researched under what conditions those theories could create the mathematical theory. And it worked out that most students were able to do that. There was just one famous person who did it the first time, or who published about it the first time, because we know that most mathematical theories were invented by different people at the same time. Now, as TK students can do that, so can as SATO students, so can young students in primary school. And so when I look for designs, when I look for context, I look for context that invite young children to invent, to reinvent mathematics. Reinventing, that's a term by Freudenthal, because of course the mathematics exist already, but not for those young children. And so those young children are really constructing understanding that to them is new. And in PMRI, we have all kinds of moments where we experimented in classrooms here in Indonesia, where we've shown that it is possible in Indonesia. When I walk through schools where one or two teachers are trying to use PMRI and other teachers are not, I see almost all classes, I see the teacher in front of the room and the children are not paying attention. And there are a few classes where all of a sudden there is a lot of noise and where children are doing everything and the role of the teacher changes. And you see children in front of the board, defending their work, explaining their work. You see children working in small groups. Why? Well, that has to do with an interesting series of investigations. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about different characteristics of those interesting investigations. Now the first one to me is, it's realizable. I never use the word realistic anymore because that is misunderstood. What I mean with realizable, it doesn't have to be real world. It can be fantasy world. It can be a world of mathematics. But the context itself gives children ideas of what they can do. So it is not the teacher that needs to tell children what to do, but the children can imagine what is possible. The context is therefore localized. It's a context that's meaningful in this classroom. And I will give you some examples of contexts that work in one classroom, will not work in other classrooms. And of course, you make sure as a teacher that children really understand the context. And the norm is that when children start working on it, they talk in the context. Their language is grounded in the context. And when you hear children removing the context and only talking about numbers, you know something went wrong. So we have to look for meaningful context, meaningful for the children. We have to look for motivational context. Now, one context that is used in the United States a lot is the context of cooking a turkey, a kalkoen. A 24-pound turkey, you put it in the oven, 50 minutes per pound. How long do we need to cook it? Now, that works great in the United States. It will work okay in the Netherlands. We don't know pounds, we only know kilos. It will not work in Indonesia or many Asian countries because most people will pluck the kalkoen apart and then it is like boiling an egg. if one egg takes 5 minutes, 24 eggs also take 5 minutes. So if 1 pound of turkey takes 15 minutes, and 24 pounds take 15 minutes. The problem is totally different. That is not a working problem in Indonesia. In the Netherlands, a problem that is used a lot is 1,240 children need to be transported in a bus. The principal orders buses, 45 children in a bus. How many buses are needed? In many Asian countries, children will say, 45 children? Oh, that can also be 50, maybe even 100 children. So that context is immediately changed. And the way Dutch children, because they take the 45 very serious, they will have to do a repeated addition or subtraction of 45, or they will have to do 10 buses is 450, 20 buses, 30 buses. Indonesian children will say 100 children in a bus. Oh, that is easy. And they changed, informally they changed the context. Now, in Jakarta, people have worked with the Transjakarta busway as a context and traffic jams. I don't think that that will be a good context on Lombok of Papua. So a context needs to be localized, otherwise it's not working. It needs to be meaningful for the children in that classroom. Of course, it needs to hook children. If the context is not important, if the kids are not embedded in that context, nothing will work. They have to think in the context. Now, take this example. The Mariana Trench has a depth of no less than 11,034 meters. It's the deepest point in the ocean. It's so deep that it's difficult to get there with submarines. It's so deep that we don't even know if there is life there. The Puncak Jaya on Papua is the highest mountain in Indonesia. I looked it up yesterday. That is what internet told me. 884 meters high. What is the difference? You know what most children do? 11,034 minus 4,884. They will remove the context. It is wrapping paper. They will throw it out. They will only look at the numbers, and the magic word difference asks for subtraction. That is why word problems are often so difficult, because children are not using the context. Now, it is totally different if I would look for a drawing. For instance, I would embed this kind of image. Because now all of a sudden the meaning of the lowest, the deepest point and the highest point becomes much clearer. And now as a teacher, of course, I can talk about, hey, but you were talking about difference and you add up. Why is that? Very informally, I'm here talking about the subtraction of a negative number. So very informally, children in this context immediately realize that subtracting negative numbers is adding up the numbers. Because the context tells them that. If I want to work with a motivational context, I have to be sure that it is not taught earlier. Because then it is only an application and children are not really thinking about it. So in a context, I really use new mathematics, or mathematics that's not completely understood yet. I avoid that a context is only a rehearsal, a repeatance of earlier knowledge. So when I look at the investigations, it's realizable, it's motivational, and then I say they need to have adequate knowledge. It needs to be accessible, there needs to be constraints and realizable suggestions, and there needs to be a variation of possible solutions. Now, let me look at those issues and come back to the different points I make here. So, people here always say, yeah, Maarten, that is nice, all your examples are for very young children, but I teach secondary education. Okay, secondary education. Jan de Lange, a colleague of mine, came up with this problem. There's an air balloon, it starts at where the X is, and it needs to go to where those 4 X's is, a little higher up the landscape. And the question is, what do you do? Now, if the air balloon is at 100 meters, there's a certain wind direction that drifts the balloon this way. When the air balloon goes up to 200 meters, let's have a view of the top, the balloon drifts away a different direction. And the question is to the children, how can you move between 100 and 200 meters to make sure that you will hit that point with the XXX? Because if I now follow this 200 meters path, where the wind drifts me, I'm not hitting the XXX. So at one moment I have to go down a little. And maybe I miss it again, I have to go up a little. What we are doing, of course, is the addition of factors. But it is a very early stage. And in the first period, what we noticed was that children were doing a sort of trial and adjusting. I never call it trial and error, because you don't make errors. You see what you do, and you adjust. And they do it in 5 different moves. And when you're too far, they miss, so then they have to start to think about how can I correct it. And then as a teacher, you can build in a constraint. You can say, well, they don't have so much fuel on board anymore, it can only go up once. So how can we do it so that you only have to go up once to 200, once to 100, and once to 200 meters, and then go down. And so you force, with a set of constraints, you force the children to really think about how to add up those factors. And Jan de Lange has a lot of examples in secondary education, more people have that. But then again, I work in primary education, so let's go for an example in primary education. I might have shown this example before, but I always love it very much. A teacher talks about a teacher lounge, and there are 2 machines, bottle dispensers, in the teacher lounge. There is a water machine that only contains water, and there is a juice machine that contains 6 different kinds of juices. And the teacher talks about it, and they talk about how the machine works, and the children understand, oh, there are chutes, and the bottle comes down one of those chutes, and the juice machine will have 6 of those chutes, and the water machine is probably the same. And then the teacher says, I saw a lady filling up the machine, and she brought in a whole bunch of 6-packs. And I said, so how many sodas, how many water bottles are in that machine? 156. And you see those children think, oh, I wish I had that. They are intrigued by the notion of 156 sodas. And the teacher says, so how many 6-packs does that lady need? And then at the same time she says, and that soda machine with the 6 bottles, how many of each flavor? Now, to us, those problems are 156 divided by 6. For the children, they are not. Because they are different shapes of division. One is what we call quotative, and one is what we call partitive. Now, take the example 30 divided by 6. Quotative means how many times goes 6 into 30? How many groups of 6 can we create? Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups of 6. You move the 6 out. Partitive means something else. So partitive means if we divide 30 cookies over 6 people, how many will each of those people get? And your movement is different. And children realize that you do different actions, and therefore 156 divided by 6 to them is a different problem. In one you move the 6 packs, and in the other you put bottles for each flavor in the machine. On purpose, the numbers are large. Many teachers think, in a problem like this, 156 is so large. We do it on purpose. It's a form of a constraint. Because if you give them 3060 divided by 6, they can just make the drawings. But we make it so large that at one point something goes wrong and children are forced to start to use different strategies. We bet on the fact that laziness forces children to mathematize. And what is important is that drawing. The drawing of the machine with slides, it suggests something like an array model. And you will see that some children will not, but most children will start using that. So here are girls not afraid of doing a lot of work. They draw all 50, because 50 is such a nice number, all 50 bottles, and did that 3 times. The problem, of course, that in 50 you have 2 leftovers, so if they combine the leftovers, and they count, and they find 26 packs. They did all the work. It's the lowest level of solution that's possible. But these girls were able to solve the problem, because the problem was designed to allow for a very low level solution and for higher level solutions. Now, Michael and Johanna solved both problems totally different. Because one problem, the 6 packs, they added up 6. And they repeated, not really as an addition, but as a table. Skip counting, 6, 12, 18, etc. And they put on notes that 60 is 10 and 120 is 20. So it's a precursor to using not skip counting by ones, but going skip counting by tens. But they are not there yet. However, the other problem they solved by making the array. They used the early array to solve that problem. And here are kids who created a solution that is the same for both problems. That is interesting, because all of a sudden now we can talk about how come you use only one solution. This work by itself is interesting because the children changed their strategy 6 times. It was not that they knew beforehand how to solve the problem. They did something, it became difficult, they changed their strategy, it became difficult again, they changed their strategy, and every time when they changed their strategy, it became a little more efficient. They're constantly mathematizing. And that's what we want. We want children to mathematize. And here's another work of children that do it. And so in the discussion is not a sharing, it's not just talking about the work. The teacher focused the discussion on that question, are those two the same problem or not? What is the relation between 156 in the one and in the other situation? And the children could not really explain that till this girl came who had built a model, and she said, well, see, if you go vertically, here you see the 6. This is the 6 pack. But if you put it this way, you see the 6 flavors. And so this girl who had to build the model to explain for herself how it worked, she was instrumental, she was important for all the children to understand why it worked. And those children who had been working at a higher level of mathematics needed this concrete model to understand. And all of a sudden, in this math congress, it was not that you had weak and smart students, but you had students who worked at a more concrete solution, and you had students who worked at a more abstract solution, and the two needed each other to develop a better understanding. So you could say students need to have adequate knowledge, from counting to skip counting to making multiplications. It was accessible because the kids who did it at the most concrete level were able to solve it, but for those children who are much more abstract, they were still being able to work on the problem at a much higher level. It contains constraints, that high number, 156, it made it very difficult. And there were suggestions. The whole idea of being able to make that array was given in the drawing of that machine. Now another problem that slowly developed in the PMRI team is a problem that started to appear because we realized that the Turkey problem would never work here in Indonesia. And so different people came up. I always quote Pa Sutarto Hadi, but we are not sure if it is really from him or it is coming from, it's probably a group effort. It started when we were working with people in Unisa, in a school there, working with teachers and trying to create a good problem. A family buys 25 kilos of rice and they eat 3/4 of a kilo each day. How many days will this 25 kilos last? It's a beautiful problem. Why? Well, it's beautiful because it allows children at different levels to work on it. I remember that when we started the problem, children had no clue of what 3/4 was. And the teacher at one moment drew a nice image of a box of 1 kilo on the board and started to talk with the children about, so what is 3/4 of that box? And children, well, more or less automatically, because that is what children do know, they divide it in two and then divide the half again in two. They have 4 parts and then they know that 3 of the 4 parts is 3/4 of a kilo. And once that image was on the board, the teacher said to the kids, okay, so go ahead. And they worked in small pairs, in small groups of 4. And there were children who drew 25 of those boxes, and I only draw 5 here. And they counted 1, 2, 3 boxes for day 1, 3 boxes for day 2, 3 boxes for day 3, etc. And that is a very nice suggestion. It's a low-level solution, of course, but it works. Other children started that way, but then they discovered, hey, 3 kilos is the same as 4 days. Maybe I don't have to do everything, because if 3 kilos last 4 days, 6 kilos last 8 days. They started to use something you can call a ratio table. What is beautiful, because now I generalize. And there were a few children who realized, hey, if I make 25 kilos in smaller parts, if I reunitize, if I look at the other unit, there are 25 times 4 smaller parts. So there are 100 small parts, 3 parts for 1 day, 100 divided by 3. And they come up, in a way, they come up with that famous, they were not there yet, but that famous sentence, dividing by infraction is multiplying with the inverse. 25 divided by 3/4 is 25 times 4/3. That is what the children did. But they did it in a very informal level. They did it more or less in the context. So they had not yet generalized that rule, but if the teacher would give 1 or 2 more examples, they would allow the children to construct that idea of dividing by infraction is multiplying by the inverse. These were only 2 of the children in that whole classroom. But a very important extra problem started to happen. Because there isn't left over, there's a remainder. And the children who counted said the remainder is a quarter. Because they had 1/4 of a kilo left. The children who divided by 3 said the remainder is 1/3. And so as a teacher, immediately you can ask the question, what? What is it? Is it a quarter or is it a third? It cannot be both. And both of them are convinced that they had the right answer. And the solution is not in the number, the solution is in the understanding what is that quarter or what is that third. It's a quarter of a kilo of rice and it's a third of a day. And so they both are equal, because a quarter of a kilo was the same as a third of a day. In this context, a quarter is a third. And you can only understand that when you understand that fractions are not just a number, fractions are a part of a whole. And fraction only makes sense if you know what the whole is. And so it allowed children in a very natural way to develop a better understanding. They were intrigued by the fact that half the class say a quarter, half the class says a third, and they needed to solve it. And so it's another example of children, a context that hooks children into a problem that they want to understand, and the children start to talk about that understanding. Now, what I talk about is that the context needs to be realizable. It needs to be localized, it needs to be in the situation of the children in that class. And the teacher, of course, needs to make sure that the children understand the context, the children can talk in the context, the children stay grounded in the context. It's the norm of your context. If you try in context in the class and the children don't talk in the context, it was not a good context. It's motivational. You see there is fun in solving the problem. But at the same time, if you introduce a big context, you will also see the children get frustrated. Because those larger investigations take much more effort. Now, one of the things that I realized much too late in my career is that we have to celebrate with children when they have some great findings. And children always have great findings. But if we celebrate now, and I have a new context and children get frustrated again, I can say, remember 2 weeks ago? Remember that it took you 3 days to find how it worked? Remember how happy you were? I promise you it will happen this time again. Mathematics is an odd subject. Mathematics is in a kind of way a sadistic topic. Because what you do is always giving children problems that they just don't understand. And as soon as they understand it, you go to a next problem that they just don't understand. They're always working at the edge of understanding and not understanding. Frustration is part of doing mathematics. There is no fun in doing mathematics if it is so easy, because it is boring. Of course, I solved the problem, I find the answer, but I learned nothing. To be able to learn, I have to work at the edge of my understanding, therefore there will be times that I'm frustrated. And as teachers, we need to help children to understand that better. Students have enough knowledge to solve the problem, but it is not a problem they already know, because then it is boring. And it's important the teacher never give a suggestion of a strategy. I see so many teachers in class 1 and 2 say to children, can you count that? Then children start to count and you force them, you make sure that they only count and they are not going to a more abstract solution. And in that language we often suggest the wrong things to children. The way is not to say something like, can you count that? The way is to say, can you find out how many there are? Hey, you didn't count it, and she counted it. And you talk with each other about what you did. It is accessible. Each student can solve the problem at their own level. A good problem, you will see different solutions in class. That immediately makes the life of a teacher miserable, because if all children have different solutions, as a teacher I have to find how to glue that together. If I'm a teacher and I tell the children what to do, they all do the same thing, my life is easy. PMRI makes it much more difficult for teachers to help children. What is important is that if children all come up with different solutions, that you create groups of children that work more or less at the same level. Not completely at the same level, because if everybody does the same thing, they cannot talk, because there's nothing to talk about. But if you put the child who is working very concrete and the child who is working very abstract together in a group, they also have nothing to talk about. The child who works very abstract doesn't know what to do with the concrete materials, and the kids that work very concrete doesn't understand the child that's working very abstract. You have to put children together who have the ability to talk to each other. And that means you make optimal, homogeneous groups. Optimal in the sense that they are enough different to talk, and they are enough the same that they know how to talk to each other. And each investigation contains constraints, difficulties, and suggestions. Gibson talks about affordances. There are always ideas of what to do to solve the problem. Because if the ideas are lacking, you don't allow children to really solve a problem. And there are constraints. Knowledge choice is one form of constraining. But there are different ways. There are difficulties, and the difficulties are such that you make the lower level solution less attractive. Now, I wanted to show you a little bit, and I have 5 minutes, and that might not be enough, but I wanted to show you a little bit of an introduction of a context in a kindergarten classroom, because people say, young children, yeah, they are too young. This teacher introduces a context with a storybook. And it is a context where the conversation is about numbers up to 10. It is about the 5 and the 10 structure. I will show you the start, I will show you a little bit of the middle, and I will show you a little bit of the introduction to the problem. Can we move the sound up a little?
I hope these chicks come soon, Loretta Lake once thought to herself. It's like sitting on a bunch of hard, lumpy rocks, and my bottom is sore. Now, Rhoda Red came into the barn, all excited for her friend Loretta. Anything yet? She asked. No, groaned Loretta. She wiggled about and trying to get more comfortable. Oh, I hope they come soon. Well, Rhoda couldn't wait.
So the story is about two families of chickens. One is a red family, one is a white family. And the red chicken already had 5 small chicks, and they're walking around. And the children in an earlier storybook had learned about those 5 chicks. And now the white hen is getting chicks, 5 again. And the story continues that those chicks are constantly walking around, but there is a fox in the neighborhood, and the mothers are afraid that the fox will get one of the kids, and they are constantly counting whether all the chickens are there. It's a storybook. You see the children are interested in those stories. That's the age where they love stories like this. And they are trying to understand, are all the chicks there or not?
So the chicks thought their mom's reaction was funny. Laughing, Ruby said, "We're all here, don't worry." Larry thought this was hilarious. "Oh, let's do it again and see what they do this time," he said. Lily, Lucy, Lola, Larry, and Lou all ran towards the barn while Riley, Rose, and Reuben hid by the cow. In order to get their moms to look, Riley pulled at the cow's tail, causing it to let out a loud Loretta and Rhoda turned at the sound of the cow. "Oh, no, exclaimed the mothers with concern. "Are all of our 10 chicks here? Are they?" So we got 3 riding underneath the cow. Are they all there? Yeah.
And the teacher uses that frame with the 10 beats to represent those chicks. And the children talk about where they see the chicks and that in the end it is 10 again. And then the teacher started to introduce the context.
Those mothers. What were they doing, Jay?
They kept tricking them until they figured out what they were doing, and there was this little trick of Rose, and in the last story he keeps trying to trap him, but he never catches him. But the father does. 10, so 2 plus 8 is 10.
She has a strip of 10 chicks, 5 red and 5 white, and she says, "Let's create our own storybook. We are going to write our own storybook. We are going to show how the chicks can hide for their mom and how the mom needs to work on that." And no. So, Dean, for instance, makes groups of 2 plus 3, 2 plus 3. And he realized 2 plus 3 is 5, and 5 is a safe number, so 5 and 5 is 10. And in the next problem, he makes groups of 2, and he writes 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 is 10, but he also writes 5 and 5 is 10. And when the teacher says, "How do you know 5 and 5 is 10? He points at the first chick of the pair, and he points at the second chick of the pair. So very informally, he is looking at 5 times 2 and 2 times 5 is the same. Of course, that's not his language yet, but he's looking at that. And so here is a boy who's talking about 3 plus 4 plus 3 is 10. And they are discovering all the ways that you can look at forms of tens. And Harrison, for instance, is making a real book. So his first page says 8 and 2 is 10. And the next is 6 and 4 is 10. And the next is 7 and 3 is 10. And the next is 5 and 5 is 10. And the teacher uses this to talk with the whole group, to debate whether his book is complete or not. Because he organizes it, but it is not completely organized yet. Because if you organize it, you do 9 and 1, 8 and 2, 7 and 3, 6 and 4, 5 and 5. But it is random, and he was missing one page. And so there was a nice moment to talk about, do we have all pages possible? Now, talking about organization with these 5-year-old children is already a very interesting piece of mathematics. And you can see that all children were capable of creating at least one page of their own book. They were all exploring the different ways of writing 10. And so I say that this is a beautiful context. It's a large number for these very young 5-year-olds. 10 is a large number. They are forcing to look at mathematics in the problem because we know that the 5 and the 10 structure is important for those 5-year-olds. The children are still talking about how to hide those chicks. The context is important to them. They understand why to do it. And it was definitely motivational. The children had a lot of fun to talk about their stories, and they wanted to bring the pages home to talk about the story with their moms and their daddies. And so, to me, it fulfills all the norms of what I call a good context. Now, I know that creating context is not easy, but the list of those points might help you to, at least when a partner says, is this a good context? It is an indication to think about, oh, will this work, will that work? And it is an indication to think about, what are all the possible solutions to come up with? Will it allow children to really mathematize? And we don't create a context just for the fun. We create a context because we definitely think our children will start to mathematize. And as a teacher, I know what questions to ask so to make sure that vertical mathematization will start to happen. Children will start to develop mathematical theory. And to me, that is the most important characteristic of a good context. It allows the teacher to ask the right questions so that vertical mathematization will start happening in a classroom. Designing is extremely difficult. You need partners to do that. You need time to do that. Let's stop it.
Okay. Okay, let's give a big applause for the interesting, powerful presentation. The key issue is context. And I believe some of us have a couple of questions, and we only have about 50 minutes. So I'd like to invite those who have a couple of questions. Would you please raise your hand and let me know who you are, where you are from, please. Okay, Puanti, a very good student, back to 2006. Yes, please.
Hello, morning everyone. Morning Martin, thank you for your insightful presentation as always. Just one question, quick question, because when you talk about the context and the evidence of children's learning from that lesson, I'm just intrigued about the challenge often that the teacher has, like in terms of introducing a more difficult concept of zero, like with the context that you have there. How do you tweak it so the students start to think about 0 plus 10 equals 0, like not just starting from 1 to 9? I think that's an interesting thing that I think can be quite challenging for many teachers to start thinking about expanding that. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
So the system 1 and 9, 2 and 8, mathematically you can say that's not complete. 0 and 10 should be a possibility. It doesn't work in this context that children will say, well, all 10 are clear and none are hidden. Because the context asks children to really spread out, to hide. So 0 and 10 is not in this context. We will need a different context to create that. Now, one of the contexts that's being used is, for instance, the context of creating, well, a grocery store has 2 kinds of apples, green apples and red apples. people always ask for mixtures of apples, because some people like the more sour green apples, some people like the more sweet red apples, and in a family, if you only have red apples, children will protest. If you only have green apples, children will protest. So you like a mixture, and depending on the amount of family members, you want more green or more red. And so the grocery store owner says, okay, I would love to do that. But what kind of mixtures do I have to make? And the children start thinking about what mixtures are possible. Now, here is a context where only red apples or only green apples are also possible. And so then you have a bag of 10 apples with 0 green apples and 10 red apples, or 1 and 9, or 2 and... So that could be a context that would work. Another possible context could be, I don't know if that is used here, but in some countries children could sleep in a double-deck bed. In a bed on the bottom, a bunk bed, a bed on the bottom and a bed on top. And so you could talk about a party. There are 10 children, and they are totally fooling the people who are giving drinks and whatever. And sometimes they're all sitting on the lower bed, sometimes they're all on the top bed, sometimes some are there and some are there. How can they do that? And in some countries, I know they use the context of the double-decker bus. You have 2 decks, and people can move around between those double-decker buses. So there are different contexts possible where that can be used to allow also to think about 0 and 10. Because it's a context with real objects, you're forced in this context to stay in natural numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3. It is impossible to extend this context to the negative numbers. And so we have to think about something completely different if we want also to introduce the negative numbers. And Freudenthal said that one of the ways to think about addition and subtraction of negative numbers is to look at that structure of mathematics. 7 and 3 is 10, 6 and 4 is 10, 5 and 5 is 10, 4 and 6 is 10, 3 and 7 is 10, 2 and 8 is 10, 1 and 9 is 10, 0 plus 10 is 10, minus 1 plus what is 10? Oh, that should be 11, but that was an outgoing list. Minus 2 plus 12 is 10. And that structure, what children develop by themselves in the discussion, could be used for the negative numbers. But we need to move out of the context, and we need to move then in the context of the number system, the mathematics. So if you want to do that, we have to talk about the structure itself and then slowly build an extension. And children are very capable of doing that. They love doing that. So it is possible. It's also possible that you look at a coordinate system where points have a meaning, and you talk about points on a coordinate system, point 34, now I have to think, point 37, point 26, point 15, point 04, point, no, I do it wrong. But you talk about the points on the coordinate system, and they are meaningful, and it's an extension of a line, a subway line, for instance. Then in that context, children will automatically extend it also in the negative numbers. So the extensions are possible, but you have to mold the context every time. What is fine? There is nothing against molding context. And I would never like to do everything at the same time in one context, because coming back to this issue 3-4 times in life is very important. You cannot expect that children have understood something the first time they encounter it. It took us a long time, it will take the children a long time. So we have to revisit this mathematical concept.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you. So if I see the participants of this room, then I would assume that the participants are having the similar experience with me. Something contextual, something very tangible in learning seems to be far away. Most of us, I believe, was trained to rely on memorization, to rely on the rote learning and formula-driven learning. Probably some of you will ask further how this background of us, mostly in Indonesian, in comparison to the more interesting one. It's more tangible. I'd like to invite Pak Opung Marpaung. Yeah.
I speak in Indonesian, maybe
Yeah.
into English. So, Indonesia is a very large country, you know. So, people in the east of Indonesia and here is very, very different. Also, the knowledge and what is this is very, very different. Last year, I went to Sumba and made some pay there. Try to pay to say something about primary, the teacher, and especially to practice it in the schools. The situation is very, very different. Yeah? So now our problem now, how to try to reduce the difference among the East of Indonesian and the West here in Japanese or the Sumatra region. Yeah, especially in mathematics. That's the problem. So I try to give some example in mathematics in Sumba, for example, in SMA, for example. Yeah? So I just say, the absolute value of x is 5. How is x? They say just 5. They don't know that minus 5 is also the absolute value is 5, for example. Now, that's the difference. How to try to educate to
Teach the guys.
To improve the situation, especially in East Indonesia. That is my big problem. Yeah? So I try to let our government how to push and to try to reduce the problem. So maybe I have to understand my language.
Indonesia is a huge country. Most people in the world don't realize that. With over 230 million people, you are 2/3 of Europe. You are 2/3 of the United States, if not more. People in the United States think that you are smaller than Rhode Island, for instance. They have no clue about the size. The size of Indonesia is huge, because if you put the islands from Portugal to the United States, you can cover the whole ocean. We can now drive by car then. It's a huge country. And more than in Europe, you have different people and different cultures. However, there are contexts that are relatively safe to be used in different cultures, and there are contexts that are less safe to be used in different cultures. The Transjakarta busway is not good in Sumba. The whole notion of a traffic jam will not work there. So we should not use that. The family that buys rice, I think that is a context that will work there too. That is a context that is good for the whole of Indonesia. So partly it means that everybody in this audience should spend time on developing contexts that will work for all people in Indonesia. If people are invited to create context, it is better, more powerful if they decide on context that work in the whole of Indonesia. So let me the master students who studied partly in the Netherlands and part in Unsri or Unisa, the assignment was create good context. And so they design context that could be used. And I showed last year an English version, but now it is translated in Bahasa, and that is probably much more helpful. It's online, I will show you how to get it. And it's free to share with everybody and to share it as a whole book. But if you look at the context, Chichi came up with a context about symmetry and in batik patterns. I think this is a context that will work on Zumba too. She created a problem about what kind of symmetry is in all these problems. And let's not go here. Bahit created a problem about perimeter and area, about how to subdivide land, how to share land, how to move pieces around, whether it is the same area or not. Now we know in geometry, we know that perimeter and area is a difficult issue for children. Most children think that if the area is the same, the perimeter is the same, if the perimeter is the same, the area is the same. We in mathematics know that that is not true. We can manipulate that. And so this is a starting problem that will work probably all over Indonesia. And there are in this book all kinds of contexts that the students for their master thesis have tried out and has improved. And it's a small collection. It's definitely not enough, but it's a small collection of possible designs, possible investigations that can be used. And I think that what the people who come to SEADR and who are working on their thesis need to do is design more and more and more of these contexts. And then in a few years we have a whole collection of contexts that can be used in different parts of Indonesia. And what you say is, in a way, Maarten, and I totally agree, if you create a context, don't create a context that is only working in your school. Try to create a context that is good for all the children all over Indonesia. And maybe even ask somebody in another island, in another place, to try it. And publish it. Make sure it's available online. We should collect all those contexts, we should make them available, and then in a few years we have so many contexts that we can do what you want to do. Now, I promised to show you how to get the book. If you scan this, you will get an immediate link to where the book is on the web. If you scan it with your iPhone, you get the link to the platform. My invitation for everybody is to create context and to make sure they are available. And my advice, given what you said, the advice to PMRI is to create a platform, an online platform, maybe Pastor Cardi can do that, where all these contexts are united, so that they become available for all the people in Indonesia. Is that answering your question, Dharma? Thank you.
So we still have 2 more minutes. I'd like to invite if any of you wants to ask questions. Yes, please. Excuse me, your name?
I have read a paper about unintended consequences of context. One of the examples is Graffi Meyer's work in 1994 about distributing cans of Coca-Cola to students, and then some students respond that, oh, I do not like Coca-Cola. So sometimes students bounded to the reality. So how should we deal with that kind of situation? If the students do not arrive at the mathematics and then they just get stuck in the context. Yeah,
it is, I think it's part the characteristic of the problem. I was in a classroom in Canada a few weeks ago. We had given the children a context about architect building buildings. We have limited the size of the sunroof. The perimeter of the sunroof needed to be a certain length. And children were exploring that all shapes of the sunroof would work. It would work if it was a pentagon or a hexagon or in this or in that. But the discussion of the children moved into the safety of the building, into the beauty of the building, and it was not talking about what the size of the content, the volume of the building was compared to the shape of the sunroof. And so the mathematics didn't happen. And we see that a lot. In many cases, it is the teacher, the role of the teacher to redirect to the question at large. The question in the case of the building and the sunroof is that we have given them a context where people wanted to build that building. You had to design it, and the question that the people really wanted answer to is, what shape of sunroof would give me the largest volume? And so here, the solution was that the teacher had to redirect the children to the bigger assignment. They were architects building a building. And sometimes that's very possible, but I've been in situations where the children went along with the context and did everything but not the mathematics. And I had to take my loss. And what I had to do the next day was come back with a new context, a new situation, and hope that I can now get them to do the mathematics. And I've never been sure why. There are situations where a context that worked in one class, another class runs away with the context. It happens. And it's an incredibly difficult moment. I can only say, and I say it over and over, if you are really using context in mathematics education, the role of a teacher is getting harder and harder. You have to be a better teacher to do that. It's not easy to teach that way. And your example is an example of why it is so difficult to be a teacher using context.
Okay, so I think that ends up our conversation, and we would like to be thankful for your presentation. Let's give him a big applause. So before I close, I will share a little bit about what I got from this moment. There are 3 points as a reference. I think the first one is contextualization of math learning is to develop our students' inclination to mathematize. And therefore, mathematizing is one of the most significant goals in learning. So it's our task to really investigate what contextualization is of great value for Indonesia. The second one is mathematizing is a matter of dealing with addressing the edge of understanding. It is true that learning may lead to frustration. However, it is also true that frustration is part of learning itself. And the third one is instructional activities need to be socially constructed. There are different characteristics of students. Some are concrete thinkers, some are abstract thinkers. And teachers are expected to tap into different kinds of intonations, concreteness and abstractions as tools. So different ways of solutions should be encouraged. There is no one single fixed way of answering questions, of getting the answers. So those are the three big takeaways for me personally. And so thanks for this great moment for this morning. And I would like to return this to the MCs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maarten Dolk and Bapak Markus Budi Raharjo.
To Bapak Yosef Dwi Kristanto MPD, we would like to invite you to come on stage to give a token of appreciation to Dr. Maarten Dolk and Bapak Markus Budi Raharjo, EDD.